And welcome everyone. I am delighted to welcome you and delighted that you've chosen to be with us this evening in the first of our speaker series, which we've titled From Awakening to Action, a seminar series on spiritually rooted activism, which is hosted by the Yerusha Academy. I'm Rabbi Nadia Gross. I'm a founder and the Chief Programming Officer of Yerusha, pronouns she, her. And what is Yerusha? We are a progressive, faith-based educational organization founded by Jewish spiritual leaders and rooted in a commitment to interfaith diversity, spiritual transformation, and paradigm shift. Embracing a multi-faith identity, Yerusha fosters understanding and connection across traditions through programs grounded in 4+1 core pillars. They are community, education, spirituality, and justice. And the +1, the foundational fifth, is the Yerusha, which is the Hebrew word for legacy, which bridges past and future and informs all that we do. In this pivotal moment of uncertainty and urgency, we are committed to offering real support and meaningful insight. This series is intended to go beyond discussion. We hope to equip you to take action in your communities, address harm, and organize for justice. Throughout this series, we'll explore pressing issues, learn from diverse voices, and develop practical skills for effective advocacy. Thank you so much again for joining us as we bridge spiritual wisdom with activism to foster a new wave of change makers ready to make a difference. So before I introduce tonight's program, I'd like to invite our Chief Operating Officer, Amitai Gross, program pronouns, they, them, to offer Yerusha's land acknowledgement.
I'm not sure I understand.
Mashallah, hello everyone. This is Yerusha's land acknowledgement. Yerusha is an organization founded in the collective, progressive, and indigenous wisdom of the Jewish tradition. We weave a beautiful tapestry of both the ancient and the modern, giving birth in partnership with all faith traditions to the next paradigm. And still, we recognize that our work is mostly done in a land that has their own indigenous traditions. As the children, grandchildren, and community of survivors of the Shoah, the Holocaust, we know that these lands, through genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced relocation, have been stolen from tribes of people who to this day suffer the indignity and oppression of European settler colonialism. Our base of operations is on what has been designated today as Colorado by a settler government. However, this land was stolen from the Hinonoino, the Arapaho, the Sotayo, the Cheyenne, the Nuchiu, the Ute, and the Oceti-Chacorn, the Lakota. Today, those peoples have been scattered and forcibly removed from their ancestral homes onto concentrated reservations and other settings that are often the most painfully affected by economic hardship, for which little to no material help is given by the settler governments. We recognize and affirm the histories of hardship and genocide of the people who lived here long before Europeans set foot on the continent. We respect and celebrate their continued histories and cultures. We wish to see a day when their hardships end, reparations are made, and ancestral lands are restored to their rightful caretakers. We commit ourselves to pay homage and honor these people in every way that we can, to learn what they have to teach us, to respect and elevate their voices, to be silent when they share their truths, and to give them space for both mourning and celebrating their heritage. As the Jewish tradition teaches us, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice must we pursue. May it be your will, Holy One, and may it be our will to always pursue justice for the indigenous people whose homelands we inhabit. Ken Yehi Ratzon, let it be so.
Thank you, Amitai. So tonight we are honored to have with us three devoted and powerful activists to open our series with the program that they have titled Never forget you were strangers yourself. Faith responses to immigrants and refugees in our time. It's my pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague of many years, Rabbi Shawn Zevit, who has always inspired me with his response to the injustices that we experience on a daily basis. Shawn serves as lead rabbi at Mishkan Shalom, a spiritually activist Reconstructionist congregation in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has spent decades consulting to and supporting congregations, organizations, social justice and sustainability initiatives in the Jewish and larger world. He trains Jewish clergy and lay leaders to lead communal prayer, directs a program that trains Jewish spiritual directors, and is a trained actor and a liturgical performing and recording artist, and a whole lot more. He's just a great human being. So I'm delighted to introduce Rabbi Shawn and turn it over to you, who will also introduce to us this evening the other friends that he's brought with him.
Amen. Thank you for that beginning. Two-thirds of the Gross team, Rabbi Victor being here with us as well for the full complement of the Troika. And thank you for the honor of being part of this series, Rabbi Nadia, and for the honor too of following you, partnering with you in the spiritual direction training program for ALEPH, and now taking over when you handed me the baton as you were director for many years. And even in that sphere, and I would imagine that you could all imagine training spiritual directors these days in the beginning of our latest cohort, the very issues of current governance of our country, democracy, Israel, Palestine, immigrants, refugees, these form the core of almost every session I have had with every directee on a monthly basis, many of whom are clergy, and also fill in our training programs, whether it's the prayer leaders or those training as spiritual directees or the activist world, almost every case study that comes up. So these issues are not tangential. We are in a moment where I think everything we value there's a feeling of challenge, and I recognize there's a bias, and I'm saying that for other people to recognize too, lest we estrange ourselves. There's a sense of finally having a voice and not being ignored, and that's part of the dance we're doing in our own community, in our own place. I think giving a little bit of background, which my intention is here to do from a Jewish perspective before I bring my colleagues, Cathryn and Peter, to share their perspectives organizationally, is that even the word itself in English, right, stranger, to be estranged from, isn't quite the biblical, rabbinic, and the Jewish legacy understanding of that word. More like fellow traveler, someone who's sojourning with us, who, when you're with us, do what we're doing. We embrace you, and you have the same rights to be treated that way. In fact, I remember one moment where somebody who was interviewing for a professional position in the congregation I serve, which is very diverse, growing percentage of multiracial, multi-faith families, Jewish, not Jewish, born here, born elsewhere, used that traditional translation of stranger when one of the parents said, well, what's your approach to dealing with a diverse classroom and with kids of all backgrounds? And they said, well, the primary focus of Jewish life is to welcome the stranger, so everyone would be welcome. It sounds nice on paper, but that's the moment that candidacy ended. Because for every parent from a multi-faith, multiracial, or immigrant refugee family, that was code for white, upper middle class baby boomer in the center who welcomes you, the stranger, in with open arms. And the Jewish people have never been monolithic that way, nor does the biblical reference mean we're all in the inside circle, we welcome you. In fact, the primary piece of justice was a mixed multitude went up with us from Egypt, anyone who sought freedom and liberation and a homeland that they could call their own and be safe and secure. And so that's an important piece I wanted to put out, because I think that lens informs how we are with each other. I was even thinking, Amitai, in your beautiful and profound invocation, that I had one of the leaders of the Lenape people as our guest, which I bring in other faith leaders every year to our Yom Kippur services. We actually had a Palestinian leader speak instead of Jonah this past year. And Adam DePaul, who is the storyteller in the tribal council, so he holds the stories of the Lenape people in an official position. One of the first questions someone asked after he had shared his people's story was, what can we do for you? Is it reparations? Should we get? He said, actually, we've so interconnected with the society, many of us now. That's not what we're looking for. Absolutely pay attention to people who are looking for that. And what we want is our story to be known. The land acknowledgement, that's all nice. But if you don't get to know and tell our story, we will disappear. So that's the number one commitment that he wanted us to sign on to, is by all means keep doing the good work, but get to know who we are and lift our story up, or we truly will have excised from the planet. And so I think as we open our arms for each other and as we wrestle within the Jewish and our faith and multi-faith communities with a bunch of intersecting issues right now, I think one of the questions I hope we'll take from tonight is, do we find places that bring us together, our bonds and commitments, to enable for us to uplift and be upstanders with each other? Or do we sow division and estrange each other so that in the reach for justice and for bringing us into the fold, we create estrangement? Amitai took one of the texts, I don't have to lift it up a second time, justice, pursuit, tzedek, tirdof. And our sages interpret that not as a technical redundancy or someone accidentally slipped on the ink and repeated a word, but rather, okay, justice. Now, will you pursue that justly? How will you pursue justice? That's what you need to pursue, is the just way of doing that. Because if you lift up one group of people and that causes another people to suffer as a result of that, then that's not justice for anybody. And so I know as we take the stand, as these days Peter and Cathryn will tell us more about this, that we have to be aware of who's at the door and who wants to come in and navigate our backgrounds and not assume anything around anybody in that regard, lest we put them at risk and so on. We still want to ask what is in best service of your people? What is in best service of you being able to live here in safety and security, and not go by our own recordings or privilege in some cases as to what we think the other people need. It's good pastoral counseling for any of us when you visit somebody to not just stand there telling them what they really need in this situation, but it's also good activism because that way we'll be able to match our intention with what's in the best interest. And that may change within the same immigrant or refugee group. Our community sponsors 3 Afghan men. They don't all need and want the same thing. One of them comes to our synagogue and tells a story. The other 2 don't want to come near that. I've had working with some of our young people of color who are also Jewish, and one year they want to just focus on being Jewish. The next year they want to lift up, a Langston Hughes poem at the anti-racism Black Lives Matter, rally. But the year before they didn't want to focus on that. And so even within an individual, we're each on these journeys. And I think that ties into some of the things that your invocation brought us to. So I just want to do a quick share here of a couple of the other texts that form our understanding. And look, let me acknowledge, in the current administration that shall not be named, there are people who I have to accept are Jewish, or people that do things that break my heart, and I can't even conceive how they fall within the sphere of some of these texts and Jewish values. And yet, if we track the Torah and the Hebrew Bible, even in the centuries, multiple centuries where we were the authorities in our own land and other people were subject to that, the way a king or ruler or government was determined whether they were godly and did the right thing had nothing to do with what they accomplished. They didn't have to make Israel great again. No, that was not the bar, that was held. It was whether they followed godly principles, lived holy lives, and made life more flourishing and bearable for the land and all peoples that were on it, whatever their backgrounds were. And you can just go to the books of Kings or Chronicles and see this person was a Shmendrik, they reigned for 40 years, but they didn't follow God's laws. It doesn't matter that they built aqueducts and this. Then this person reigned for 4 years and then fell off a roof and unfortunately died, but they were so pious and they brought sense of connection to the sacred back again. So even as we acknowledge there's always different apples in the bundle, there's something I think about the long term of Jewish tradition that's always lifted up. Did someone embrace holiness and do good for all people, or did they use power over instead of with? And so that's the benchmark, so lest we start to get into cynicism and say, oh, but look at this one doing, look what that one doing, and we got it all, folks, and every people and every faith path has them. And at the same time, as good old Zechariah said, these are things that you shall do. Speak everyone truth to your neighbor, execute the judgment of peace and truth through your gates, and let none of you devise evil in your hearts against your neighbor, and love no false oath. For these are the things I hate, says God. Right? And to pick up Rabbi Hannah a few centuries later, what does the text mean, you shall walk in God's paths? Surely it doesn't imply that a person may actually walk behind the divine presence. Rather, the meaning is to emulate the attributes, clothe the naked, visit the sick, comfort the mourners, make sure that no one feels estranged. I don't even want to use the word stranger. Make sure that no one feels alienated, estranged, pushed out of that circle. And one last text I wanted to share in this opening, which I take from Rabbi Ira Eisenstein, who is the son-in-law of Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who founded Reconstructionist Judaism. And this one, I pray on this one a lot, especially when stuff gets hard, or maybe I don't see Peter or Cathryn often, and I started to get my own isolation, and oh my gosh, how am I going to deal with all the suffering that's around us, or the latest executive order, or whatever's going on. But belief in God, or let me say it differently, claiming faith, meaning purpose, staying engaged for the greater good, has to do with human nature, with the way individual people act, with their attitudes and ideas of good and what is bad. If we believe that life is worthwhile, that it is good, that in spite of the sickness and accidents, in spite of poverty and war, in spite of all the sad and difficult conditions in the world, that the world can still be made a better place, then we can say we believe in God, meaning purpose, truth. When we believe this way, we cannot be discouraged, because we believe that all the misery in the world is due not to the fact that the misery must be there, that it is a necessary part of life, but to the fact that we have not yet discovered how to do away with that misery. And I hold on that a lot, especially in the area of making people feel welcomed, immigrants, refugees, those who are most at risk in our society, because it keeps it on us, not on a God out there, or, when are you going to come through with us? But as every Jewish prayer service ends, Aleinu l'shabeach. By the way, it's upon us to take all this insight into life. And that's where liturgically the phrase l'taken olam b'malchut shaddai, to repair or rebalance the world, tikkun olam, which we often use as a metaphor for social justice, it appears for the first time in a liturgical setting, that we're to aim to make for the sake of the greater good, not to fix everything, not to be the heroes in every circumstance, but to really take it upon ourselves to take a stand and link arms together in these situations. So that's a little bit of the background there. And the last thing I wanted to mention, to give a little bit of shout out, it so happens that this week, totally unbeknownst to any of us, the synagogue where I serve, Mishkan Shalom, was featured on the front page of the Jewish Exponent, our local paper. And who was featured? Gail Bober, the head of our Immigration and Refugee Task Force. And it was a whole expose on the work that she and we are doing, and include a little shout out to some of our friends organizations here as well. So I just wanted to do a quick share-y here. And let me see if I can get her up quickly. I'll give the Sharon the last word, and then we'll do a little switch around. So talks a little bit about Sharon's background. And for any of you here tonight or listening to this later or trying to organize your own communities, we often think of the expert or the person that's, the seasoned veteran or got the most credentials could be the person to take this work on. Ain't necessarily so, right? And some of Gail's background, working in the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, relief agency work, etc., all that preceded her work in that way, and her following what touches her heart, right? She can't even exactly cite why this area matters to her, except that her father was an immigrant, and he gave back to the community through the synagogue, so that became a model for her. She's not someone, she'll be the first to tell you, I don't come to all the services, and I'm not the biggest keeper of observances and all that. In our tradition, if someone does something for the greater good in community, it's considered as if though one prayed. And so, as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, pray with your feet, not only, with your words that way. This helped Gail organize, along with Judith Bernstein Baker, the former executive director of HIAS Mid-Atlantic, and organize our members in a variety of ways, and eventually gave birth to two of our members, forming Welcoming Homes, which has enabled college-age and young adult immigrants and refugees be placed in homes with people that help them continue their education and have a back or have like a rooted family that's behind them as they navigate these systems, whether it's driver licenses, where it's dealing with Russian clientele, and just kind of fast forwarding through some of that. And then eventually finding communities or places. Again, I don't want to equate piety of a religious nature with the depth of activism. It's wonderful when that aligns. But even Gail is an example of someone who said, I can do so much on my own, but if I align myself with a community that's committed to these values of justice and repairing in the world, and even more so, I would say we're not alone. In our community that we're part of networks such as Power Statewide Interfaith, New Sanctuary Movement, a variety of different networks where we are part of a larger group of faith-based and justice organizations doing the work, we have a better chance of having an impact at City Hall, in the state, and even in the nation that way. It's special because being welcoming and opening to hearing viewpoints and people caring for the community at large. And I think that's something important too in our work here, is having the enlightened self-interest that organizing demands, but also the sense of I'm not just in this for me, I'm part of something greater, and I commit to that even when it doesn't always align with everything that I want to do. I want to encourage us, just as the Jewish tradition and Torah says, is be careful of of turning things into idols. Because in Hebrew, the word idol comes from the word pesel, which means to carve out something and elevate it to the whole. So even in our work in justice or fighting for immigrants and refugees, if we lose our eye on the prize and become only focused on one area to the discount of any other inputs or viewpoints, we risk falling ourselves into fundamentalist good work on behalf of others. And we might actually not listen to the people that we're there to serve most because we know what they need. And so I think that's an important piece I wanted to lift up from what Gail said. So having given us a little Jewish context and a little, here's kind of what we're up to and what we're trying to do some work on, I wanted to bring in my compatriots here. And Kathy, if we can start with you, the not so new anymore Executive Director of HIAS Mid-Atlantic, and with all your background working for justice. And what a time you have taken on this leadership mantle. Just in case you hadn't noticed, right? You know, COVID and politics and challenges of democracy and assault on those taking a stand for immigrants and refugees. So please share, Cathryn, your own perspective on these issues.
Thank you so much. And I'm really happy to see you all. Just a quick note, I'm from HIAS, Pennsylvania. HIAS, Pennsylvania is actually separate and independent from the national HIAS. And that is actually going to become very clear very soon, because the national HIAS is working, participating in the resettlement of Afrikaner refugees, and HIAS Pennsylvania refuses to do so. And I'm happy to talk about that if people have questions. We are still, of course, friends and have a shared concern for immigrants and refugees, but we have different strategies about what we think is the appropriate way to meet this moment, which is a good segue for tonight, right? How do we meet this moment? There is so much that is overwhelming. That said, I very much appreciate, Rabbi, you're bringing up the word stranger as the English word and not really necessarily capturing the meaning. One of the things when I was speaking in January, actually, on Inauguration Day, at an event that HIAS Pennsylvania hosted, I mentioned the famous quote from Leviticus, the alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. And I brought that up for to emphasize the point that there are multiple references within the quote to equating you with the immigrant. They reside with you, they're to be treated as citizens among you. You shall love them as yourself because you too were immigrants in the land of Egypt. 3 times in one sentence, they equals you is the exhortation and the takeaway. And part of how I think we got to the moment that we're in is because we have not followed that exhortation. And by that, I mean, even those of us who have worked very hard in support of immigrants and welcoming them have still continued to use language that treats them as them and not as us. And I think that that is a critical shift that we have to find a way to make. Certainly language is important, clear communication is important. And so it is reasonable to try to use a term that refers to people that have come to this country from somewhere else, weren't born in this country, you know, so that we can know who we're talking about. But the truth is that it has gone way farther than simply making a distinction between who's come in versus who was born. And it's become this really divisive word, that others. And the othering of immigrants is nonsensical, particularly for Americans, because unless you're a Native American, you are an immigrant. And I I do a lot of public speaking, and in almost all the places I go, one of the questions I ask is, raise your hand if you're a Native American. Sometimes there's 1 or 2. Most of the time there's no one. And so the point is, when we're having these discussions about what to do, the discussion should be what should we do about us, about our people, because we're all one people, regardless of your origin, regardless of where you were born. And so I think that that is an important part of resistance. I think that being careful about the words that we use is really important to kind of make it clear that we are all people. And so when we're talking about people that are being persecuted, we're really talking about everyone that is currently on American soil, because that's what's happening. Everybody on American soil is being persecuted or at risk of being persecuted. So I think that that is an important point that I hope we, in the breakout sessions, we could talk about more. The other thing I wanted to do with my time, which I want to be respectful of your time, and I know that it's fairly limited, but given what has been described many times by many people as a fire hose, I wanted to do a quick rundown to make sure that everyone is on the same page about what is happening in our country. Most of you will know about most of the things that I say, but you may not know about all of them. So I'm just going to do a quick rundown about so far. So first, I'm going to define this as the lawless actions of our federal government. Starts on January 20th, day one. The refugee program, which is a congressional program, was shut down by the president without consulting with Congress. When that program, that action, the federal government was sued by the national HIAS as well as several other nationals. And when the court ordered the federal government to reopen the program because of this failure to consult with Congress, the response from the government was to terminate every single contract with every single resettlement agency in the country. So we can talk about Afrikaners in a second, but until those Afrikaners entered the country, refugee resettlement did not exist in this country. That violated the Geneva Convention, and it violated our own obligations under our own federal law. In addition, the federal government claimed that they couldn't possibly restart the program. It would take at least 90 days because there was so much work and challenge in really getting everybody up to speed. They then promptly vetted and approved 40 Afrikaners, more than 40, for resettlement. And there's a couple of things to know about that population. They do not meet the international definition of refugee. This country has permitted other groups who have not met the international definition of refugee into the country. But in order to do that, Congress was approached. And it was requested that Congress pass a federal law that permit groups that were discriminated against, but not meeting the very rigid definition of refugee. And that resulted in the Lautenberg Act, which is how Soviet Jews and other religious minorities in the Iron Curtain were permitted to resettle in the United States. With respect to the Afrikaners, the government made no approach to Congress. They simply decided that despite the fact that this group did not meet the international definition and met no federal definition, they were going to push them through. Security vetting, which many of you may know, is normally a decades-long process. These Afrikaners were vetted in 1 hour. 1 hour. Now, that is what we say a shanda. For the president to be saying on a daily basis that the people that are coming into this country are not vetted and they're criminals and they're gang members, and then to turn around and vet for 1 hour a group of people and then welcome them with open arms at the DC airport is more evidence of the lawlessness of this government. The other thing they've done is terminate a national contract for naturalization funding. They had no grounds to terminate the contract. So HIAS Pennsylvania and 8 other nonprofits across the country sued the federal government about the termination of that contract. They failed to extend the contract for youth representation in violation of the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which authorized the funding for youth representation. The government has been sued about that as well. And they have recently said that they will provide funding for that representation, but up until September 30th only, which means that effective September 30th, children will be left without representation. Many of you know about the story of Garcia Abrego, who was deported with no due process whatsoever. You also know the story of 200 Venezuelans who were deported with no due process whatsoever. You know that the president has contracted with a foreign prison to warehouse immigrants who are not from that foreign prison's country. What you may not know is it's not only El Salvador, it's also Costa Rica, it's also Panama. This federal government has disobeyed a court order to halt the deportation of the Venezuelans. They have disobeyed a court order to return Abrego Garcia. They have justified expedited deportations, in other words, deportations without due process, by invoking the Alien Enemies Act. And two separate courts have called this invocation improper, and therefore, therefore anything based on the invocation is illegal. On Friday, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service announced that no one is eligible to naturalize if they're found to be anti-Semitic. They had further announced that social media will be checked for any applicant, and anyone who is found to have supported, quote, anti-Semitic terrorist groups, anti-Semitic terrorism, or anything deemed anti-Semitic will be grounds for denying citizenship. There have been multiple detentions and threats to immigration status based on free speech. I'm sure most of you are aware of that. In addition to the lawless actions are the lawless proposals. Eliminate habeas corpus for detainees. So habeas corpus is a process where people who are in jail can petition for extraordinary relief to be released. The proposal is to eliminate that right for people who are detained. Signing additional contracts with countries for prisons for Americans as well as immigrants on American soil. Demanding local and state law enforcement to quote unquote cooperate with ICE. And then of significant concern is the immigrant registry, detentions which are requiring persons of color, persons with accents to carry papers, border detentions of documented persons upon reentry to the country after travel, and demands to search cell phones. So that is the ever-growing list of lawless and behavior and lawless proposals. Okay, I know we're at time.
Cathryn, yeah, we need to transition to Peter, but I wonder if, given everything that you are making us aware of, what's one way that you find, given people are in all these different places and states and would have to navigate it, what's one thing that you find you can hang your hat on or encourage people to do so that they can not just be overwhelmed and drown in the assault, but find their way into doing something that might be effective?
Yeah, so I think that's an easy answer. All of us, like I said, have heard at least one thing on the list that I just read. So if you don't remember the other things because you didn't hear about them, don't worry about it. The one that you know about, you should be writing to Congress and writing op-eds. You should also consider making appointments with your congressional representatives because they care about what their constituents think.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cathryn. Thank you for your fearlessness. Other people might melt down just getting through the list, but I feel every time you list another egregiousness, your spirit rises and it challenges us to go with you, which is exactly what Peter's all about in life. And my friend, you've been at this for decades now in this work at the New Sanctuary Movement in Philadelphia, which is composed of multiple faith communities from different backgrounds, and a lot more than that short introduction would offer. So anything else you want to say leading into what you want to share with us tonight?
Fair. Thanks, Rabbi Shawn, and good evening, everybody. Really excited to be here with all of you. And so, yeah, New Sanctuary Movement is a faith-rooted immigrant justice organization. We organize communities of faith, really to live out our scripture teachings. And so, we work with mostly undocumented immigrants as well as allies, bringing people together to accompany folks facing deportation, do education around rights, as well as how to organize, and then fight campaigns to either fight anti-immigrant and racist laws or to work for laws that are more welcoming. And I think as I prepped for today and really just sat with that text, to welcome the stranger, I kept circling, right? It's a teaching that's so central to our traditions, so based in love and kindness and in being good and justice, and a teaching I have built so much of my life around. And as we've heard tonight, right, it feels like we are living in a time when the government is not just ignoring this, which would be bad enough, but is actively doing the opposite, almost as if they are following a text that says to persecute the stranger, to sow fear and terror in the stranger, to have masked agents roam around communities of the stranger, to take away every safe space, and allow agents to enter places of worships or schools or hospitals, and to celebrate cruelty to the stranger, and send the stranger to Guantanamo or El Salvador. And I think beyond this too, the administration is quickly moving to make it illegal to welcome the stranger. Right? We see this escalation, arresting activists with green cards. We see, we do a lot of trainings for faith communities about how to prepare your team and your space in case ICE ever came, and talk about the risks there. What are the risks? What are the consequences? Talking about harboring or obstruction, just to defend somebody's right to worship and live by our teachings. Right? Stephen Miller and Tom Homan had floated the idea that offering Know Your Rights could be counted as helping people evade arrest. In the last week, we saw a significant escalation where the mayor in New Jersey was arrested for being part of a protest of a detention facility. And so I think the question is, what do we do when this core teaching is being made illegal or is deemed a threat by the Trump administration? And it's a big question, and I want to slow down here because it is a hard question, and we're at a moment when it's not just about attacking immigrants, we are marching toward authoritarianism, and the ground of risk is shifting under us. And I think for me, as a person of faith, as an organizer, it is reassessing what is our role and what risk are we willing to take right now, and how do we discern that? And for me, right, I can get stuck in my head when I think about that, right? And there's always reasons to say no or to rationalize. But I feel like also when I take a breath and really just sit with scripture, there's some clarity there. And so what do we do? As I was praying on this and thinking about this, I was thinking about also too the second part of this text, which says, right, so, because you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. And I started thinking about Exodus. And I think there's some examples there of discernment, right? I think first, right, Moses in the desert with the burning bush, right? When God is asking him to stand up to Pharaoh and work for liberation for the people, we find Moses very hesitant, kind of wavers, goes back and forth. He seems to find reason after reason to say, no, go find somebody else. Luckily, God is pretty patient with him. And ultimately, he says yes and steps into that role and steps into God's plan of liberation. But he has to step out of his comfort zone. He has to take risk. And I think we learn from him that it's normal right now for us to be going back and forth, or at least I do. I feel it helps me, gives me some soothing to be going back and forth about this. And normal to have self-doubt on our way to getting to yes. I think the other two characters I thought of, and please excuse my mispronunciation, but were the midwives, right? Shipra and Pua, who quietly, or maybe not so quietly, made a really firm decision to refuse Pharaoh's order to kill the male children and says yes to God, says yes to life. And I think what I learn in that wisdom from them is that it's important to know the law, but it should not determine our actions because we have our own executive orders, right? We have our orders to welcome the stranger, to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. And I think for me, when we think about what we're doing, I think this guides not only why we do it, but what and also how. Because I do think as a faith community and as people of faith, it's important what we do right now. It's important what, for our scriptures important, our rituals are important, our symbols are important. And I think what I love most of all in this work is to sort of bring that scripture rituals into the street. And so, right, like we've been fighting for Philadelphia our mayor is very non-committal on keeping Philly a sanctuary city, which is good policy, right? It's good policy. It keeps families together. It upholds the Constitution, and was a hard won campaign, won by lots of people, including lots of immigrants. And so a bunch of folks came out, including Rabbi Shawn, and like we covered the love statue in Philly with a black shroud to mark the grieving and lament the covering up of love during this time, but also to push our mayor to stand strong against Trump when they come and try to take federal funding. We're also fighting against the rescission of the sensitive locations memo, right? And that's the rescission of the internal guidance for ICE that from 2011 that said ICE should not go into places of worship, schools, or hospitals. And I think when Trump revoked that, it really felt like trying to take away every last safe place someone has. But I think also, right, we remember that our traditions are so much older than that. And so I think standing in that confidence, right, we brought over 30 congregations together to build an altar outside of the ICE building in Philadelphia to remember and claim our places of worship are not just safe places, but they're sacred. And so we built an altar with lots of different faith traditions. We broke bread. We prayed together. We sang together. And I think what was so uplifting for me was just really standing in the confidence of who we are as people of faith and fighting how we want to fight. And that's lifting up, right, the power of love, lifting up our strength as community. Um, and in the last couple of minutes, I think, right, so ICE has also been terrorizing communities, right? And fear is really high. So sometimes ICE has just been roaming around. And I've been doing this with NSMs for about 18 years and have not seen ICE this aggressive. And so we have a ICE Watch program where we have people from different congregations in different parts of the city who are ready to go out when we get a report to confirm if it's ICE or maybe it's a security guard outside of Walmart. And if it is ICE, to document, to communicate so we can tell the community, but also offer witness there. We continue to do accompaniment as we see more people being arrested at ICE check-ins. And I think that part, right, we often support the awesome lawyers that Kathy has by just going and being a witness, right? But I think there's something important about being in relationship and letting our hearts break right now. And I think I come back to that a lot because it's easy to get hardened right now with everything that's happening or get numb. And I think we have to be intentional to keep our hearts soft and keep letting them break because I think that leads us to action. And I think also building power, right? We need to pull people together. We need everyone now to meet this moment. We need people and congregations to meet the next 4 years and beyond that. And I think it's going to be hard. And I think we're in a time right now where we are going to be asked a lot. But I think it's also helpful. I find it really helpful to remember all the good people are doing right now. And to remember it matters what we do. It matters what our synagogues and churches and temples do. And it matters what cities and universities do. And something I hang on to is whenever is like being together in community in the street, whether it's like covering the love statue or building an altar, but in spite of all the scary things happening, um, despite living in a time where welcoming the stranger is becoming illegal, there are a lot of us. And we are brave. People are ready to act. We are powerful. And I think it inspires me and keeps me going when I see all of us willing to stand up and say yes to welcoming the stranger and to keep fighting for God, the God's liberation.
I want to, once again, I want to really thank you for joining us this evening. It sounds like we've all been awakened to action, and we would love to hear from you as you organize in your communities. So reach out to us, let us know what you're doing, what's going on. If you have more questions, send them to us, and we will take those to the experts and do our very best to continue to share the support that we all need. And please join us again as this series continues on Tuesday, May 27th. We'll hear from an Afghan refugee in Pakistan who was awaiting resettlement in the US when that was all taken away. His presentation titled In Limbo and in Danger, Afghan Allies and the Politics of Abandonment will be at 4 p.m. Eastern Time to accommodate the time difference for him in Pakistan. And on Monday, June 16th, back to the 7 p.m. Eastern Time start, we'll hear from Dr. Stuart Lord and Dr. Jojo McManus in a presentation titled Dismantling the Narrative, the White House, DEI, and the Future of Civil and Human Rights. And there are more in the pipeline as we speak. And we have other Yerusha Academy also hosts the Institute for Deep Ecumenism and the Saging Legacy Program. The Institute for Deep Ecumenism this summer, a member of our core faculty, Yoreshet Ruach Moragren, will offer a two-part course titled Our Sacred Texts, Protective Magic, that's beginning on July 10th. And the Saging Legacy Program is bringing back the summer tea time, where we offer a taste of spiritual eldering issues. On June 25th, we'll introduce Soul Collage on July 17th, exploring saging with poetry by Rosemary Londorf, and she'll also be teaching her two courses this summer, Creative Saging with Journaling and Soul Collage, which is a 3-part course, and Creating Peace of Mind, a 2-part course. So please, I want to ask you to watch for promotions in our email as more classes and programs are unveiled. And at this point, I'm happy to invite Rabbi Shawn for our closing blessing.
Thank you. A little bit of a freeze there, but that was could also see that a divine intervention of taking a moment to just breathe in and let all the words settle with us. And is it that moment, Rabbi Nadia, that closing moment we discussed? Okay.
Yes, it is that moment.
I missed the handoff and the silence there. So, yeah. So I'm going to just do a quick share-zy because when we were in our own
Oops.
non-breakout group, blessing of breaking down the isolation, of hearing each other, of doing more than marching and organizing and taking to the streets and intervening, but also taking the time to connect in these ways. I recently wrote an article on the portion of the week, which was Leviticus chapter 19, and included that in the section in Leviticus called Kedoshim, or holiness. And I decided that I wouldn't just use my own words, but I lifted up 4 young people, each over the year. The young woman who became a bat mitzvah on Saturday morning, standing next to her as she spoke in Spanish and in English to honor the heritages of both her family, who were both Jewish and Hispanic immigrants. And so I just wanted to give their words and a closing prayer to hopefully help us in our own particular way as we now, with some deep thanks to Cathryn and to Peter so much for your partnering, and to Reb Nadia and Amitai for giving us the opportunity here. And each of these are from 4 different 13-year-olds over a period of 10 years. One of my good friends said to me, I always believe in second chances, and a reason to rely on people, holding out for the good in them. There's the Talmudic idea of lakaf zechut, or first impression. It means seeing the best intention before assuming the worst, even when someone has messed up. Others need our support, and people need to trust to heal. My question for you today is, how do you respond to hate in your community and your part of the world? And how do you love your neighbor as yourself? And I will tell you, out of the mouth of a 13-year-old and 20 13-year-olds later who each put their hand up in the congregation to respond to her question. I just want to rewatch that interaction every time I'm feeling really down or hopeless, because they are claiming the places we might fear to tread. Right? And I'll just jump to this last piece over here. Lest we throw even the smallest of our action, what the first, I want to give her a little credit there, Lily said was, I think is so important, because as we try to do this work, we sometimes judge each other over how pure we are in our intention and action, and don't leave room for learning as we go. And that can be a real danger, the way we undermine each other, who's being right or just enough. So let's remember that opening text to pursue justice justly, including how we organize together and learn from our mistakes. No good baseball player gets into the Hall of Fame hitting a home run each time. If you hit 1 out of 4 times, you're an excellent baseball player. So let's learn from where we strike out as well as where we connect. So Rabbi Chia, 3rd century rabbi, said, another young person, stressed the fact that the text says over and over, you shall be holy, for I am holy, right? Holiness and kindness is everybody's responsibility. Based on all the things I've studied and thought about, what holiness means to me is being able to let the little things go and realize that what actually matters for yourself and others in the long run, not just what you think is the easiest or simplest thing to do. Your actions moved on, or lest I say after we've left this planet. So please don't underestimate to do this work. And in the words of our of Rabbi Shefa Gold and the tweaking of Rabbi Arthur Waskow, Litakein olam b'malchut Shaddai, Litakein olam b'malchut Shaddai, healing the world through the majesty of nurturance. We heal the world through the majesty of our nurturance.